Christmas Eve, 1968, the time of year everybody's been waiting for. While the kids are excited to wake up in the morning tomorrow, the greatest picture of all time is being taken. This picture, named Earthrise, represents the world as a whole. It's beautiful. So why, when Neil Armstrong said the famous line the very next year,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind,"
did people think it was faked? One reason people think the moon landing was faked is because they believe the government didn't have the technology at the time. Apollo 8 was actually intended to be a low Earth orbit test. NASA had not intended to fly to the moon in 1968. Its lunar hardware was still unproven, and Apollo 8 was slated merely to test equipment in low Earth orbit. So when the US landed on the moon the very next year, it seems a little suspicious that NASA managed to get the technology to land on the moon 7 months after a failed attempt. The technology required to do a moon landing is incredibly complex, and the trip to a moon takes a long time as well. It means people are going to have suspicion about a broadcast about a supposed moon landing to millions filmed on cameras. It felt fake. A spaceflight conspiracy seems to make more sense, as a cover-up from the government would end up tricking all the other nations. It'd make you believe the government was a lot more technologically advanced than they really were. Another reason people think the moon landing was faked is because it seems too good to be true. We flew to the moon and stood upon it. Yet we also had cameras recording it all. It was 1969, and if you look back upon the technology they had at the time, it doesn't feel like they could have flown with such a bad computer by today's standards. They also managed to land on the moon, then flew back to Earth, which is a huge feat in itself. Doing all that just seems difficult when the government could have just hired a film crew and done it on a set. When you try to compare an actual moon landing to a lie spanning over half a century that even Soviet Russia, the people who would want to prove the US wrong, congratulated them on managing to land on the moon, you would also have to realize that the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, and was an indication of some of the best special effects at the time. And it ends up looking pretty fake compared to the footage from the moon landing. The most noticeable difference between a set with a big light off to the side and a moon landing is the shadows. If you take a closer look at the shadows on the ground, you would see they fall off in a diagonal fashion, whereas in the moon landing footage, the light ended up being perfectly straight. The only way they could have pulled this off is either having a large laser wall with thousands of lasers on it, which was impossible at the time, or a light source 93 million miles or 150 million kilometers away. Finally, people think the moon landing was faked because a book called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle by Bill Kaysing pushed fake moon landing theories. Kaysing had actually contributed to the US space program, albeit tenuously, between 1956 and 1963. He was an employee of Rocketdyne, a company that helped design the Saturn V rocket engines. In 1976, he published a pamphlet called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle, which sought evidence for his conviction by means of grainy photocopies and ludicrous theories. Kaysing's book added fuel to the fire of the moon landing conspiracies. He's the man who started it all in the eyes of the people who believe in this conspiracy. He seems credible, as he was working with NASA with rocket engines to propel their rocket to the moon, though in actuality he never really contributed to the moon landing itself, as he was just working for a separate company that was just helping NASA get their rocket off the ground. He's praised as the person who said something while everybody else was afraid to, which ended up fueling the conspiracy into what it became. So the reasons people think the moon landing is faked is because they don't believe the government had the technology to do it, it feels too good to be true, and a conspiracy book by Bill Kaysing pushed fake moon landing theories. Despite everything that we do, nobody will fully agree on everything. We have to accept that and try to provide facts and reasoning for our arguments. The moon landing is another thing that has too much evidence backing its reality, but yet you can't convince everyone. Be careful and educate yourself.